August installment of the CFEDC Presents series. We are Cape Fear Economic Development Council. We are, as it says here, promoting economic growth in the Cape Fear region through the limitless potential of innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. If you have any questions about our organization, I do suggest you go to our website, www.capefearedc.org. Should be able to answer any questions there. Check out our board of directors, many of whom are here tonight. And before we get underway with tonight's presentation, I do want to plug our presentation for September. It's going to be September 25th. It's going to be a New Hanover County Commissioner Candidates Forum. It'll be right here, just like all of our events are. However, that's September. Tonight, we are presenting on the the NC Coast Clinical Research Initiative, specifically our Regional Clinical Research Organization Cluster. We have the benefit tonight of having Mr. Randall Johnson, Executive Director of the North Carolina Biotechnology Center Southeast, here to present on that, and also Ms. Julienne Orr, who is CEO of Modoc Research Services also. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Johnson, and if you have any questions regarding CFEDC or anything, feel free to approach me or any of the directors anytime tonight after the presentation. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for braving the storm and the weather tonight. I just drove in from Charleston, so it's been a fun day getting through the weather. It's good to be here, and I really appreciate your having us. We're really excited about this initiative, the NC Coast Clinical Research Initiative. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to give you some background about the broader biotech vision that we have for the region and how that clinical research initiative fits into that. So we all know probably how strong biotech already is in the state. It's number 3 in the nation for biotech companies, North Carolina, largely driven out of the RTP economic development engine there, the cluster there around healthcare. And tons of other opportunities around the entire state. We'll go into that a little bit more later. When we think about biotech, and when I work on biotech, it's very broad, the work that we do here. It can fit into 3 big buckets of healing the world, fueling the world, and feeding the world. So within those 3 big buckets, we do a number of applications and do a number of things to support companies that do those 3 things. I don't really define biotech most of the time as much as talk about the applications where biotech can be used. Agriculture is a big one. We'll talk more about that later. Biotech is education. It's related to food, the environment, fuel, and energy generally, forestry, medical applications of all sorts, including diagnostics, aquaculture, and we have a very strong aquaculture program here at UNCW, workforce training and education generally, and most importantly, it's global. So how do we compete globally in this market that does touch healthcare, does touch food, it touches bioproducts and fuels and energy? One of the ways we do it is by looking statewide in North Carolina for opportunities. And we started about 1984, actually a little bit before that, with investments from the legislature of North Carolina in building biotech and biotech economic development. We formed the North Carolina Biotech Center. When I say we, I mean the state of North Carolina. I was, in grade school then, but we had visionary leaders at the state level, from the governor, from Jim Hunt, and followed by Jim Martin, who continued the investment, from the legislature, from their partners at all levels, to start investing in this biotech thing. And now you see we're number 3 in the nation because of that sustained investment in biotech. So at the Biotech Center, just to tell you a little bit about what we do, we invest, we're an economic development organization, but we do have programs where we invest in educational opportunities. We've invested in teacher workshops that have trained over 1,800 teachers in the state of North Carolina. We invest in research all over the state, from university research, some company research, but millions of dollars of investment across the state over the years. And we invest in companies. Of the approximately $23 million that we've invested in companies, mostly through loans, we've seen a return on that of $1.7 billion in additional follow-on funding. That's from venture capitalists, from angel capitalists, just from the investment that we put into a company. We've leveraged that for $1.7 billion. Pretty strong. And generally, the biotech industry in the state continues to be strong. We're one of the only industries that's gone through the recession. You can see there is a huge impact on the state with $64 billion, a lot of jobs, and they're high-paying, clean jobs. This is a 2010 study, but we're actually updating that now. We assume those numbers are going to be even larger once we look at the big picture 2 years later. Our ultimate goal is this: new jobs across the entire state, not just RTP. We're so glad that we've got that strong engine there, but we want jobs across the entire state. Ultimate goal of improving people's lives, and a number of ways we can do that. A few years ago, we did a strategic plan with the Department of Commerce and other organizations, and one of the things we identified was the need to develop new assets across the entire state. So we started by opening regional offices. I run the one here in the Southeastern region, but we have several offices elsewhere that focus on sectors that are specific to the assets and capabilities of those regions. So the Triad area has a very strong nano-biotech focus. Here it's ag biotech. We really have ag biotech capabilities across the entire state. But here in the Eastern office, basically the eastern third of the state, is very strong in ag biotech already. So here, next-gen biofuels, we've called that sector for a number of years. I'm starting to call it bioproducts, and I'll tell you why in a little bit here. But these are our main sectors. You know, you can see it's very broad, but it is based on the opportunities and the assets that we already have here in the region. We look at all these diverse challenges, and we look for solutions that are tailored to those challenges and tailored to those sectors. The marine biotech industry, to develop the way it should, needs something different than the clinical research industry, than the biofuels and bioproducts industry. So we look at each opportunity and we customize what we do to meet those needs. In renewable bioproducts, biofuels is just one part of that. When this discussion started coming up a few years ago again, after some hiatus of 20-some years or so since the 70s, most people were saying, what can we do to produce biofuels? Now a lot of people are saying, what can we do to produce a whole range of bioproducts? And one of those things is biofuels. Cellulosic ethanol is going to be a big one for our region. I don't know if you just saw the announcement of the USDA loan guarantee, $100 million for Chemtex, which is a Wilmington company, to build a cellulosic ethanol facility in Sampson County. They will basically take energy grasses, you'll see a picture of that sometime later. They'll take that energy grass and convert it to fuel and energy in Sampson County. You may know Kim Jones. Some of you have probably seen her present. I think she's actually presented for this organization before. She's one of our close partners and is producing algae for a whole range of products. She's one of those folks that started out saying, I want to create biofuels, and now she's looking more broadly at bioproducts. That's, again, Kim, but with Michelle Savoa, who's an educator at Brunswick Community College, focused on algae, focused on marine technology. They work very closely together. And then we have companies here that are already doing bioproducts work. Amyris is a multinational that works with the Leland company, Glycotech. When you hear about the military doing jet fuel tests, algae-based jet fuel tests, that comes from Glycotech. They have part of their partnership with Amyris is not related to the jet fuel part, but we have a company right here in Leland providing that material for the military. That's their facility here. It's not a great picture, but you can see right here some infrastructure going in. They just recently invested almost $5 million in additional infrastructure at that facility in Leland. So they continue to grow and add people. I was out there a year and a half or so ago, and they had 3 people working there. And they were trying to figure out, what are we going to do to grow? What are we going to do to stay alive in the recession? Alan, the president of that company, hit the ground, worked out deals with Amyris and other companies, and now they're above 30 people like that. So that company's doing well and will continue locate, I shouldn't say where to locate, it would be in this general area. Ag biotech is another big deal for us across the entire state. In fact, we have, over the course of the past year and a half, 2 years, developed a statewide ag biotech effort. And that really is to identify and capitalize on the assets across the whole state. But that relates directly to here with opportunities in all of these sectors for the Southeastern region. In North Carolina already, I mentioned how strong we are in biotech generally and in the healthcare industry. With ag biotech, we're, depending on who you ask, number 2 or 3 in the nation for ag biotech. And we barely even tried to make that happen. It's happened almost organically. When Jim Hunt started investing in the Biotech Center in '84 or so, a little bit before, he thought the Biotech Center was going to be an agricultural biotech center. You know, he's from state, he wanted to see that happen. In fact, it went more toward health, but now we're reaching back and looking at the opportunities in ag biotech, partially based on the fact that we have 5 of the 6 top ag biotech companies headquartered in North Carolina already. The ultimate deal there is we're trying to answer this question of how are we going to feed all the people in the world with the increasing population, and how are we going to provide enough water for them, especially when you consider that water is used so heavily in agriculture to grow our food. How are those problems going to be fixed? 70% of the world's fresh water goes into farming. So biotech is one solution. I'm not here, by the way, to say that biotech is the solution. There are lots of ways we're going to have to piece together components of the larger picture to make this happen. Lots of opportunities, again, in many sectors. And for us in this region, we're focused largely on entrepreneurial opportunities. And really in the state, we have recruited some companies here, including one I'll tell you a little bit more about later, but I really think most of our opportunities lie in entrepreneurial ventures, new ideas being converted to the marketplace. And we're looking at answering this question: what is the future farm going to look like? Most of us probably have a picture in our mind of corn growing or tobacco. There's still going to be a lot of that still. Biotech crops are prevalent across the U.S. and are grown on standard farmland. But we'll also see greater use of energy grasses on land that can't be used for anything else, or spray fields that are used right now for waste products to remediate that waste. The future of agriculture is also going to look like this: greenhouses. There's one company that I mentioned that we recruited from Canada called Modoc that grows vaccines in tobacco plants. So in about 3 weeks, they can grow a tobacco leaf, extract the vaccine from that, and the process that used to take us about 6 months in an egg takes us 3 weeks in a tobacco plant. So think about the implications for that from a pandemic standpoint, or a biodefense standpoint, or just a general health standpoint. Look at what we can do in a short period of time with agriculture and health. And of course, we can change all these waste products that we produce on the farm, in municipal environments, agriculture in general, forestry waste, and we can convert those to all kinds of new products, including fuel and energy. There's that energy grass I was talking about. Grows very high, very quickly. Sweet potatoes, we grow a lot of those in the state, and especially in this region. We don't harvest about 40% of the sweet potatoes. They're left in the field because they don't look right, or they're cut in half, or whatever. Let's take those sweet potatoes and turn them into something else, like fuel or energy. One company, additional company I'll point out here is Novozymes. Some of their technology and some of their enzymes will be used in that Chemtex project that I mentioned in Sampson County that will convert to energy grass. That is a world-renowned company based, their portion that deals with cellulosic enzymes is based in North Carolina, international company, and we're happy to have them right here. Tobacco is the other one that I mentioned earlier, tobacco for vaccines. So a lot of cool stuff going on. I just point this out, not for you to be able to see it necessarily very well, but the idea of having a complex of ag biotech companies and support facilities and resources for those companies to grow, especially for a bio-based economy. There's definitely a sustainability element to everything we do, and especially in agriculture. You see here a whole range of benefits from working within biotech for some of these solutions to problems that I mentioned before. Marine biotech, I'll mention this really quickly because we're in such a strong marine biotech area. You know, there are only a few states that have access to the ocean, about half of them. And of those 25 or so, only 7 to 8 have marine biotech programs. Ours is very strong, competitive internationally, and they are looking at a range of opportunities, all the way from pharmaceuticals to fuel to fish farming for food for people, and tons of other applications in between. I mentioned earlier that the Biotech Center invests in education. We do teacher workshops, but we also do a number of direct teacher-to-teacher kinds of activities. We've got the Marine Biotech Program at UNCW, Marine Science Education Partnership up the road in Carter County. So a number of things on the education side, a number of things on the research and advanced education side, with the ultimate goal of commercializing technology into the marketplace, new companies, new entrepreneurial ventures. Research and commercialization support, these are just some of the programs that the Biotech Center offers for research. And a number of companies already. One that is on the verge of creating a whole new industry for North Carolina and beyond is Aqua Plantations, which is a marine fish farming company. They grow Carolina sea bass, black sea bass, which is grown, and the technology was developed at UNCW. This company will commercialize that technology in the marketplace, where you can see some of these tanks on an existing farm, on unused farmland, or most importantly, inland. So they can create salt water in a cost-effective way inland, in a way that we've never been able to do before, because of the way they can use biotech to process waste that comes out of these tanks. So it costs so much less to produce that salt water inland. You can now have marine fish growing in Sampson County, Columbus County, normal farming community. These are some folks at UNCW growing some rotifers down there to feed the fish. Hatchery that we financed at the UNCW Center. These are some of the fish in the tank growing. That's Wade and his assistant holding one of the fish. They're tasty. That's Aqua Plantations tank where they grow some of the fish. They did a market study that we funded a couple of years ago with fine dining restaurants in New York, San Francisco, 4 or 5 other metros, where they randomly selected these fine dining restaurants, shipped these fish up there. The chefs created specific menus with those fish. They were delicious. People loved them. The chefs came back and said, "Great. When can you start shipping?" And they had to say, "Well, we're still in the early phases. We haven't had the investment to start growing the industry yet. So we know the demand's there. We just need the investment in the infrastructure to start that company." There's some sushi, Carolina black sea bass sushi. There's some cooked preparations there, and lots of opportunity there. Some of you may have been to the Center for Marine Science at UNCW on the south side of town. If you did, you probably went into this building, the main building with the auditorium. That's where most of the research is taking place that's being commercialized or is ready to be commercialized into the marketplace. And they're actually in expansion mode. This building will be completed in February of next year. It will house a commercialization unit from UNCW called Bionic, and it will house companies that locate there or they grow their out of the technology. So entrepreneurial ventures are big for marine biotech, especially for this area, and we'll see a lot of development there over the next few years. Regional capacity is a big deal for us. A few years ago, a lot of the things that I've been talking about were not even possible. But pulling people together, resources, getting people on the same page, is what leads to some of the benefits that we see now. And this Marine Biotech Center of Innovation is a group that we funded to the tune of about $2.5 million over 4 years to commercialize that technology that I was talking about. We've hired someone from a West Coast company, expert in commercialization. She also brought the $400 million Scripps investment in Florida, worked with the governor there to do that. So she's got a lot of talent, and we're looking for her to bring some of those same talents here. We just hired her a couple of months ago, and she's hit the ground running. So that's the context, to give you a broader view of what we're working on for biotech. Important to this picture, though, as you probably figured out, is job creation and companies. We've got great infrastructure to support those companies with education and all kinds of business management assistance, SPTC, et cetera. But we have these companies, most of you know PPD, you've written about the building. But we also have all these small companies to mid-sized companies to larger companies that work here. These are just a few of the logos, all the way from a relatively small shop like Julie and Matt Orr's Modoc to PPD and everything in between. Emmett, my colleague Emmett's going to talk more about that in a minute, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how important this cluster already is to our region and to our area, and how we're working to grow that. To really focus on what needs to be done to grow this already impressive sector, we formed an initiative called the NC Coast Clinical Research Initiative. Basic idea there is it's a regional economic development initiative. It's not just about Wilmington, it pulls in Brunswick County and Pender, but also there are opportunities to pull in a diverse patient base all the way to Pembroke area, and pull in doctors who want to do clinical research. But we want to be and are the focal point for strengthening this community. We've already got great companies here, we've got great programs at UNCW for training. What can we do to grow those? When we've got these folks together, these industry partners at UNCW, and asked, what do you need to grow here in the region? What do you need to stay here in the region? This is some of what they've said. We want more community cohesion. We want to know who's out there, who are the other companies, what they're doing, and we want to build some partnerships here. They've said we want the local community, the statewide community, and national community, and maybe even beyond, to know that we're here as a cluster. We want them to know how strong we already are. North Carolina is very strong in clinical trials companies. We've got a great cluster here. And the third one is we want to see more clinical trials conducted here. As you'll hear from Emmett momentarily, we already have a good number happening here, but there are some things we can do to increase those numbers and have more clinical trials here. Basically, again, we have an extremely strong cluster. We've got a lot of assets to work from and to build on. So what can we do to do that? What can we do to build on this exceptional clinical research program, which can be all online? It's graduating people here. It's working with industry to determine what their needs are so we have a better and better program. And same thing for statistical sciences. And Wayne here has been helping us tremendously with all of these efforts, by the way. We've got a base of physicians who we can work with, some of whom are already conducting clinical trials, some of whom have not yet or are interested, so we're helping them move in that direction. We've got a diverse patient base, which Emmett will talk more specifically about. And we have this initiative, we have this group of people who are working together to solve some of these problems after we identify what some of the issues are and what some of the assets are. So with that, I'll hand it over to Emmett to tell you a little bit about, ask him to find out what our sector here really looks like and give us some recommendations on what we can do specifically to build that. So I'll hand it to Emmett Owens here.
Thank you, Randall. I appreciate the opportunity to present with you all this evening. And basically, I'm going to give you an introduction slide that we're going to cover, give you a little definition and background about clinical trials, how do they kind of manage, really quick overview, don't kill me, Wayne, please. How does Wilmington really compare to the rest of the communities in North Carolina? Then we're going to talk about the specific companies that we have in this area and what's really great about that. Also going to make a case for why we need more clinical trials in the areas that we can grow in, and then kind of wrap it all up. So basically, we all know that Wilmington has PPD, and that's all I thought was there originally, and probably like most of you, but there's a whole host of companies. It's kind of like a hotspot for clinical trials, really. One-stop shopping, as I would call it. And these businesses help to do a lot of things. As we're going to see, a lot of niches, as some might call them. However, while Wilmington does have a strong cluster and a nice mix of companies, one of the things that we need to do is foster collaboration between these organizations, and it really can serve as a catalyst to help grow and enhance Wilmington economic vitality. There are several, as we all know, these companies are knowledge sector and pay higher than average wages and have a great positive impact on the local economy. The goal of the NCCR, I'm going to call it North Carolina Clinical Coach Research Initiative, is to bring together these stakeholders and seek out ways in which we grow the clinical research cluster. So as we move on to what clinicals are, as you can see, this is basically the basic definition. Basically, a pharmaceutical development company, often called a sponsor, will develop a new therapeutic that needs testing and needs to go before the FDA to gain approval. So the drug development companies will hire a CRO who will walk it through these steps in many cases, and they can provide a whole potential list of services. They do pharmacology, toxicology reports, but most importantly, they serve as a liaison to the FDA to help their product get to the marketplace. In some cases, they might even hire smaller companies, and that's what a lot of what we have in Wilmington. Not the full-scale, full-blown CROs, but companies with more specialty niche markets. For example, Clinical Trial Management Associates in Wilmington focuses on patient recruitment for the region. So now that we have some background information about clinical trials, let's discuss how Wilmington actually compares. As you can see, Wilmington's highlighted there in the bold. And when we look to somewhere like Fayetteville, we see that we might actually be doing pretty well. But we can pull up when we can look at Asheville and Wilmington County. And they're hosting 163 clinical trials. Wilmington's hosting 106. There's obviously room for us to improve here. But what's really interesting about Asheville, as you'll notice, is that the number of physicians has increased. They have more physicians than Wilmington and Persian College. They also have a very unique initiative at Mission Hospital in Asheville, which is a research institute which was formed in the early 2000s to specifically focus on bringing clinical trials to the Asheville area. So now we're going to kind of get into the different companies that we have, and I've decided to classify companies into 3 different categories. The contract research organizations like the big PPD and like Modoc might be classified into and Chiltern. And some of these companies are very large, like Wilmington, while there's like Modoc are relatively small entrepreneurial ventures. We also have a number of clinical trial support companies that have various niches, and a lot of these companies can do different things, but we kind of force them into a category here, such as biostatistics, human research support, medical writing. And what's really interesting about all these companies is that they really do a lot to employ. One of the other categories we have is drug, medical device, and testing development. Really cool, it's Modoc, a pretty cool company located here in Wilmington. So what's the total impact? We have 19 CROs employing 2,470. We have 35 35 clinical research companies employing 210 plus. And we have 14 drug, medical device, and medical testing companies employing 90 people. Total employment for the cluster, 2,775. We have 68 companies. That's pretty impressive for a small place like Wilmington. I mean, it's truly, like I said, it's a hotspot and a one-stop shopping area. So now that we kind of move on into what can Wilmington do to have more clinical trials? Well, one thing I want to point out is that in Brunswick, in Pender County, and Columbus, and some of the more rural counties, they don't have the specialty physicians that we have here in Wilmington. What I'm driving at is they probably come to Wilmington to receive medical treatment. So we look broader for the medical statistics rather than looking for the companies. And the companies, we just focus in the three-county area, Pender, New Hanover, and Brunswick. For the medical data, we're going broader. We're going to incorporate all these areas that might have rural patients. One thing you might want to consider in a clinical trial is the age of the patients. It's called an inclusion criteria. We have, as you can see, New Hanover County has a relative number of younger folks, age 20 to 29. We also have Brunswick County in the area of, and Pender County having a greater percentage of those age 55 and older. As you can see here, the percentage of population with diabetes is relatively large. You can see Columbus and Duplin County have really high numbers there, and in general, the entire community. Percentage of folks considered obese with BMI equal to or greater than 30 is pretty staggering in Duplin County and Robeson County. the percentage of population with AIDS. While we're not above average, what I will say here is that there seems to be a lot of activity involved with the clinical trials here. And maybe we can bring in some of those folks from Cumberland County since Fayetteville isn't doing too terribly much there. As far as mortality rates with cancer, there's slight upticks in Dupont and Columbus County, and looking pretty good overall, but we can still host clinical trials in the area because we are baseline with the United States and the state of North Carolina. Mortality rates for heart disease, as you can see, staggering in Columbus County. Sepsis is relatively high in the entire community as well. And this is a really interesting fact to throw it out. There may be some work that can be done here, but there are a large number of folks in New Hanover County being treated for alcohol and drug addictions. And if any new therapeutics were to come out to address this issue, it seems like we might be able to host a clinical trial. So what are some recommendations from this? Well, one thing we could do is recruit additional trials to the area that target these specific medical conditions. These were the conditions in the diseases we just covered that are already above average. We should also seek doctors in the areas who work in those specific specialties to see if they'd be interested in conducting clinical trials. Again, we want to include inclusion criteria and say 20 to 29 would be a good group to recruit, as well as those 55 plus. We also want to continue working with patient recruitment companies such as Trial Management, and there's another one I just found, MMG, and see what we can do to help support them. We need to work with New Hanover Regional Medical Center to kind of, again, using Asheville as a best practice city. Maybe have a regional research institute whose goal and focus is to bring in additional clinical trials. And we also want to talk about how important the clinical research cluster is to the Wilmington area. We all know that they above average. We all know there are a number of them now. So let's continue to collaborate and make this a better cluster. So takeaway, we do have a strong cluster. The Southeastern region is well positioned to increase the number of clinical trials long term. As we've seen, we get plenty of room. And what we're going to see is that the North Carolina Coast Clinical Research Initiative is really going to help make this cluster stronger by linking different companies together. We're going to have somebody working with Julie. Julie might not be an expert in that subject. She's like, oh, I know this person in Wilmington who is. Let me get them on the phone and call them. Let's link them up. Let's do business. Let's collaborate. And you also have some competitive advantage that might take place with different companies dealing with different workers because they have different things. Some people perceive that as being bad, but it could be a positive thing to attract and build this cluster. So, and I'll leave you with that.
Thanks. And I will say too that some of the companies we've talked to, most of the companies we've talked to have said it's actually a good thing that all these other companies are here because we can swap employees. If we hire somebody, recruit them here, it doesn't work out with us, we know that they can go somewhere else to work, and that's an attractive factor for that employee. So I've only heard one person say they don't like that in this competition, that they don't approve of. But yeah, that's the case there. So great data, and thanks for offering that. Any questions for Emmett at this point based on any of the data? I'll tell you, and he'll be here as well if you have anything else.
Feel free to ask. There's a lot more scratch the surface sort of.
Yeah, he's put together a longer report that will be available to the public pretty soon on a website that Julie's going to show you shortly. But I wanted to hand it over to Julie now. She's an amazing asset for our region. She runs Modoc Research with Matt there and other employees there. I think I saw Solana right there. Great company, one of those entrepreneurial ventures that we mentioned, and the kind of venture that we need to help grow. But as we were developing this initiative, we needed someone to be a co-leader for this, so that it's outside of the Biotech Center. And so one of the UNCW folks has joined up to do that and has been working with Julie, who was nice enough to join up too, to be the co-lead, to run this clinical research initiative. So I'll hand it to her to let her tell you a little bit about what we've been doing and what we plan to do, and then she and I will answer any questions that you have after that. Julie Orr, Modoc Research.
I get to talk about the fun stuff, and we have had some fun. A year ago, Randall and I and Natalie from UNCW got together and started working on this initiative. And one of the real hard parts in this area is while we all like to live at the coast, we all like to hide in our houses or in our private offices. And I was the same. I was a virtual company here since 2005 and only became a footprint in the community this year with locating an office on Racine. But when we got together and started talking about this initiative, we knew that we were going to have to connect people. That was one of the key things, was that there was so much diversity in this area as far as people in clinical research, but we weren't always known to each other. So there were a lot of things that we had to work on. So, as I said, this is our first year with the initiative, and so I'm going to run through quickly how we got started, and some initiatives on communication, looking at networking opportunities, and then finally some of the educational opportunities we're bringing to the area. We started out with a targeted focus group that met in October of last year. We had over 20 participants. Wayne was one of them. Randall. We had a diverse group of not only university people, but industry people, and also industry that was outside of the mainstream of clinical research and more of that biotech area. And we got together and really did a think tank session on just how we could look at this area and draw from the presence that was already here and make it stronger and more enticing to companies to look at us as not only a site of clinical research, but also bringing new business into the area. One of the things that we've done is recently this summer we launched our website. It's www.nccoastclinicalresearch.com. And here is our answer to number one, communication, with putting on there our events as they occur, targeting, identifying companies in the area, bringing other new information to this. So we hope to grow the website and really be able to use it to the maximum capacity. As Randall mentioned, this is a nonprofit organization, so we've basically done everything on a shoestring budget. And thanks to Randall and Bill Sackley at UNCW, we've been able to stretch a dollar pretty quickly and bringing in resources like Bonsai to help us do the website design on a pro bono basis. So we greatly appreciate our other businesses in the area that support us. One of the things that we looked at was taking the initiative of again, looking how do we bring people together, how do we make people known, how do we support each other in the area. And we've done that through quarterly or periodic networking events. We started out wanting to do them on a quarterly basis, and we've been pretty successful so far. And a lot of that is around budget and the restraints. We've had our first leadership networking social was held at City Club, and it was actually sponsored by Cape Fear Commercial. And some people thought it was an odd pairing, but Cape Fear Commercial actually saw the benefit in being able to support the area and being able to work together in the needs of companies coming into the area, needing business space, companies like myself that needed business space. So they were very gracious in supporting us and getting this kicked off. The other one we did just recently in June. We try to spread the wealth across the city and look at different places. So in June we were down in the riverfront for an event at Le Capelon. And again, we've really drawn in a great group of people representing not only NC Biotech, but the university and local businesses. Another thing that we've wanted to stress was being able to bring education to the area. One of the highest cost items for people in clinical research is education. And it's not so much that you're not participating in being part of the clinical research program at UNCW, but there's need for constant continuing education. The FDA takes great pleasure in changing regulations all the time. And so it's a method of keeping up with that, in addition to just learning new techniques and new aspects of not only therapeutic knowledge, medical knowledge, but just operations on how to conduct a trial. So one of the things that we've tried to do is to initiate Lunch and Learn series. We've held two, one in February and one in March. CFEC was the host for the first one. And these were actually webinars that were put on by the American Clinical Research Professional Organization. And so we drew from having those opportunities to bring groups together. The one in March was held at the UNCW School of Nursing. And this one was nice that we were able to also incorporate a lot of the students that are in the clinical research program and have them mixed with the industry, which is a rarity. A lot of times you go through school and you never get to talk to someone that's actually in the business you want to get into. So they found it very useful. And one of the topic we actually had was how to enter clinical research. And so it was not only the topic, but the audience was well paired. Then we've also had another focus group, and Randall mentioned this earlier, where we brought together the group from UNCW with industry representatives in addressing how can the university best improve their program that they already have in math and statistics. And it was another group of 20 plus people representing various companies, and these were specific representatives that were involved in clinical research in the statistical output, looking at data management and best practices, and really being able to bring a lot of experience to the table. And I'm happy to say we just got a readout from the university where they've actually done some of the changing in the curriculum based on the outcome of this focus group. So they took the summer and actually tweaked some of the program, and hope to actually become much more involved in bringing SAS into the group and to support the university and some of the programs. Looking ahead to next year, one of the big achievements, or one of the hopeful achievements that we'll have next year, is bringing clinical education to the forefront and putting on a day-and-a-half session where we bring in trainers to go through good clinical practice training. This is a mandated practice training that is typically expected for people in clinical research to do every few years. Basically, it brings you up to speed on the current regulations and practices in conducting research. And this is not only from the monitors or the research associates, the research nurses, but this will also involve the physicians, the research nurses that are actually working with the patients, because we're trying to be all-encompassing as far as especially supporting the physicians in their involvement. This type of training usually runs anywhere from $600 for a 4-hour class to a $2,000 course for 2 days. Usually you have to go to a major metropolitan area to get this type of training. So we hope to be able to get some partners in bringing in and support for this type of program and bring it down where it's only a couple $100 and people don't have to have the expense, companies don't have to have the expense, but yet we can bring in some really high class and very well placed education. This fall, we look to bring in some numerous speakers. Starting in September, I'm just working with Tamara Norton today. She actually is a former FDA auditor who runs a company out of South Carolina called Modoc. She is usually brought in on some very high-profile cases where there's been data fraud or a lot of the, if you hear some of the stories where drug companies may not have clearly identified research data that they had available or something, she goes in and inspects and supports the findings with the FDA. She has some great war stories, but she's also very informative as far as just how to avoid those things. She's actually going to be doing 2 talks, one during focused around the physicians. In October, we're going to be bringing a panel in regards to insurance. And liability insurance is a big player, as you may expect, in clinical trials. Sponsors have to have insurance to do the trial. People working in monitors or investigators, everyone down the road has to have insurance to cover their liability. Even down to the medical writers are covered. We're actually putting together a panel to address current changes and expectations around insurance coverage. And Mike Robertson, who is here in Wilmington, is going to be the moderator for that panel, and we're bringing in some groups from locally and in Virginia to come down and give a presentation there. And then in November, we're going to have a guest speaker, Corinne Lee, who is Vice President of Beijing. And Beijing is actually located in Beijing, China. And she's going to be talking about how conducting clinical trials in the world with the virtual CRO. And many of the smaller companies, like myself, we work in that virtual model of bringing in smaller companies to assimilate what PPD does as a whole full service operation. So we look forward to having her speak. We're also going to be implementing dinner talks. Again, trying to accommodate the needs of all times and places and groups, and having speakers. And as I said, in September, we'll have Tamara speaking to the primarily investigator audience. And then in October, we're going to have Ken Phelps, who is president of Camargo. And Camargo is a company that actually takes companies that have found a need for a currently approved product and repurposing it for a new indication. And it's a very strong market. It's the way a lot of new drugs are coming out. And we're very happy that Wilmington Pharmaceuticals and Jeannie Haley is helping us get Ken to the area. He's a national speaker. The company is just opened up their second office in RTP, and so we look forward to having him. And then, as another initiative of this group is constantly checking back and connecting with UNCW. And over the summer, Bill Zachary and I met with, starting in April, we met with former chair of the IRB. The IRB is an investigational review board. The IRB is actually an ethical committee that has to approve a protocol before a study can start. It's basically to ensure that there's not going to be any harm done outright to a patient or in the course of the study, that something is not going to be done legally, morally, or ethically adversely to the participants. And so Bill Zachary and I met, and there is actually the university is getting ready to expand to what they call a second committee, which will be focused on approving drug trials. The number of trials that are actually processed through the current committee is just an enormous number, given that it's probably up to the level of where the Duke IRB was before they expanded from one committee to 8. So there's a lot of research going on. A lot of it is data-based research, not patient-based research. So you may ask, why is this all so important to us? I mean, obviously those of us that are in the industry, it's our bread and butter, it's our desire, our personal convictions to be involved in clinical research. But I was trying to come up with some evidence of how does clinical research really impact the community. And I happened to find these two very recent articles that was written. This one is actually in regards to the Michigan area. And the number of jobs that are created when clinical research, the trials themselves, I'm not talking about just the businesses, but just the trials and the number of trials and the amount of money it brings in. Because you got to realize that with a trial, you can start with the physician and the patient, but you'll end up with a UPS man. So it's a far-reaching scope of people that are brought in and whose jobs are part of clinical research. So this is one article in the Detroit paper with the University of Michigan School of Medicine and the number of jobs that they were, unfortunately, it's a little small and hard to read. And then also in Ohio, we're seeing the same thing, where there's a lot of evidence that's coming out in some of the new studies that are looking at the connection with the number of jobs that are being created in regards to the number of trials that are actually being conducted in a geographical area. So hopefully we can increase the number here and also increase the number of jobs. Thank you. I forgot. In case you're interested, if you ever want to participate in the clinical trial, you know somebody that's interested, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov. All companies and all trials have to be registered with the federal government, and so they're all listed there. You can do a search on the type.
Question. Can you talk about the health benefits to a community when clinical trials are conducted?
That's a massive question. Clearly, the benefit is just, number one, just starting with the jobs that it's going to bring to the area. Sponsors, when they know that they can come into an area and they can place trials there, I mean, obviously they're going to put them there because they've got resources. Once a company becomes comfortable with an area, they're going to go back and back and back. It may be because of the population, it may be because the investigators who put the patients on the trials. They have success here, and so that just adds to the number of jobs that can be brought in. Then also, in some trials, it just depends on, if it's a trial where they're looking at the demographics and a reason for a particular ailment to be more prevalent in an area. Obviously, there's an innate amount of benefit that can come from that type of information.
Does it give people access to therapy they wouldn't otherwise have?
Well, it gives those that are eligible for the trials, it obviously gives them access to drugs that, because they're not on the market, would obviously be access to those. Another good resource is Medline Plus. This one, it also has various links available to it, and then hopefully in the future we'll have more and more information and links that will be added to the nccoastclinicalresearch.com as well. Okay.
Thanks, Julie. Well, you see there's a lot of activity here, and a lot of the activities are targeted to very specific groups. And sometimes they're the folks who work at the companies, sometimes they're the leadership of the companies. Maybe the leadership networking series, for instance, is specifically for leaders of the companies, community leaders, to get together and have no content, just conversation. And the lunch and learns are specifically for people who work at the companies to go and learn something about the clinical research industry. So what we do is targeted hopefully to the specific needs of individuals in the community. One reason we wanted to be here tonight to talk to all of you is because it not only takes the people who work within the clinical research industry to make this industry successful, it takes all of you, it takes a range of people, and this goes broader to biotech as well, to all of the bioproducts applications that I mentioned, the agricultural applications. It really takes the community to make that happen. And I'm going to leave it there and open it up for any questions that you might have for any of us, including Emma. If you have questions for me, Emma can answer those.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Can we bring it down to the local level? Talk about CFEDC, talk about Cape Fear Future Commission. We all know what they're trying to do. What's your advice to the mayor, John Pennant, people like that? What can we do to take this very promising area, increase it twofold, fivefold, tenfold, working with it?
Bottom line, to start with, is these are knowledge sector jobs. These are the types of jobs that we want to see happen here. I think we need a diverse economy, and knowledge sector is an important part of that diverse economy. We have a number of initiatives, as you mentioned, that are geared toward knowledge sector workers. As I mentioned earlier, entrepreneurship is key to a lot of this activity and a lot of our future growth. So a lot of things we're doing already are moving us in the right direction. I would think more cohesion within the community and not necessarily a common vision, but some shared values around how to move that community forward would be helpful from an entrepreneurial perspective, knowledge sector, economy perspective. I think K for Future and the Entrepreneurship Center at UNCW and SPTDC, I could name all of the organizations, K for Economic Development Council, are geared toward finding some of those solutions and moving us in the right direction. Do you have additional thoughts on that?
I could also just, to pick up the communication, you know, to sell ourselves. There's a lot here already. We just need to be a little more vocal about expressing it and showing it. You know, people can come and see BPD, but they can't come and see a lot of the companies that are kind of tucked away and have a smaller presence, but oftentimes are a little more quieter. So I think if you know, Wilmington infrastructure as a whole can speak up a little bit more about what is here, that will serve the strength as well.
That is a great point. And I will say too, related to that, I've talked to every economic development organization in the city, the region, and beyond. They're all interested in including information about this sector in their existing promotional materials. What we took to them was to say simply, we have a strong sector, a strong cluster here already. When you talk to the world, whether you are Wilmington Downtown, an Entrepreneurship Center, Wilmington Business Development, CFEDC, any organization like that, when you talk to the world, make sure you tell them about the cluster of clinical research companies that we already have here. And everybody loves that idea. They're completely on board with it. Additional questions?
Randall, you mentioned workforce education a couple of times. Do the CROs have are people graduating from school properly educated, or do they have to go outside? The CROs hire people and bring them back here, or how does that work?
It's diverse, and I'll give you an answer, and I would ask Julie as well to add to that, and maybe others in the audience who have even another perspective than I have. A few things I can tell you. Number one, we've got a very high-level training program at UNCW, both for clinical research, which is an undergrad program and a master's program, and for staffs. And as Julie mentioned, we've had the focus group to go to industry and go to UNCW from the Chancellor's office all the way to the Math and Stats Department and say, industry people, how have your relationships been with people you've hired and interns that you've worked with from UNCW? Are they prepared? Are there things that UNCW can do to better prepare those people for the workplace? So we're working on those things. UNCW is already graduating people that work well with industry based on industry feedback. But what can we do to make those folks even better prepared? The other thing that I've heard from many CEOs I've talked to here, they've said, we don't actually need the employees to be well trained as clinical researchers. We need them to be we need them to be critical thinkers. And when we hire them, we can train them to do the stuff they need to do at our companies, but we need them to be able to come on board. And if there's an issue or a problem, we need them to be able to be creative enough and think critically enough to be able to solve that problem. So there's a mix of skills that are needed and a mix of skills that we're preparing students with already. Before I answer another question, let me hand it to anyone else who has Wayne was with Inc. Research, and they have a number of ways that they train their employees. Would you like to mention anything about that?
We do train both internally and externally, but we paired up with the UNCW folks. We hire people in as interns. We have interns on board now, both at our facility here in Wilmington and in Raleigh, where we're headquartered. And like I said, we bring them in and work with them as trainees and then move them into various parts of the company. So for clinical research, a lot of the exposure you see are clinical people actively involved with as patients with clinical study coordinators. But I've worked people working in my group in corporate quality. We've hired people into regulatory affairs that read and understand the regulations coming out from FDA. And we do a lot of training, but we find this program to be one of the best we've worked with over the years. We look forward to getting more students on a regular basis.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure, I think you had a question.
Hey, Randall, yeah, just for clarification, in your presentation a couple times you mentioned biotech crops and biotech aquaculture. Are you referring to genetically modified organisms or genetically modified seed, or what is that definition when you talk about biotech?
Not necessarily, and I try not to define it really because there's so many applications that are relevant. A lot of the work that I find is going on in North Carolina is not really related to genetically modified, especially in this region. A lot of what folks look at, for instance, I see the coniferous plants on the back. Venus flytrap in southeastern North Carolina, Columbus County, we have the first agricultural biotech program in the nation. Those folks really focus on taking Venus flytrap, and this is a conservation effort, by the way, because we only have this one little area where they grow naturally, and people poach them, and we need to be able to replace those. So they take the Venus flytraps, they find the best examples, they clone those examples, which is not genetic, they don't modify, and then they micro-propagate those clones so that they can grow mass numbers of Venus flytraps to place back into the wild. At some point, they're not doing that now. That's the ultimate goal. But basically, they take the specimen from the wild sometimes, they clone those best specimens, micro-propagate, grow them in a greenhouse so that they can then go back out into the wild to take care of those stocks that have been depleted. So that's not genetic modification. There are a number of, you mentioned aquaculture, marine fish farming. None of that work relates to genetic modification at all. It may sometime in the future, but so far there's no discussion of genetic modification of fish. It's the biotech portion of that is largely in the waste remediation stream and the gender selection and the feed creation so that it uses less fish meal, so we have to get fewer fish out of the ocean to put into fish food for the fish that we're trying to grow. They're putting plants and algae and other things in the food. So really the work that's done here in this region and most of the state has very little to do with genetic modification. I will say too though that when you look at the national crops, a lot of those are genetically modified, mostly corn and soybeans, biotech cotton, and that allows less water to be used in some cases, drought resistance, fewer pesticides to be used, so there are benefits in many cases to that. That being said, I think maybe what you're leaning at is some of the ethical and moral questions around biotech crops in general. We have great programs at Wake Forest and in Charlotte that look at bioethical questions, and we definitely support that sort of investigation and discussion about the best way to move forward with genetic modification, anything related to biotech.
Sure. Well, that's good to hear. I just was concerned because, like you said, I know in a lot in the Midwest, there are a lot of GMOs and that sort of thing, and I just feel like it's sort of a slippery slope, if you will. I feel like there's a lot that can be obviously gained in the benefits that we all expertly describe. I just want to make sure, where we stood on that particular issue.
That's where we are right now, but as we move forward, I'd welcome you to be part of the discussion, and especially as some of the big thinkers in the Wake Forest area and Charlotte area start to identify some of the issues that relate directly to North Carolina. If you'd like to have a voice on that, I'd be glad to connect you with some folks.
I have a couple of questions and just a statement, if that's okay. Just going back to some of the benefits of having conducting the clinical trials in this area, obviously, is also that the participants, whether they be subjects in the early phase or patients, they're getting paid. So hopefully that they would be spending that compensation. I've worked for some early phase companies, and the compensation can be not bad. And so hopefully that they would be spending that locally, thereby boosting the local economy. But one of the questions I wanted to ask is this initiative looking to RTP as a model and possibly taking some of, obviously they started from, they had to start somewhere, and they're very much, doing very well. Are they taking any cues from them and gleaning any lessons learned from what's going on in RTP? And what are the long-range, specific, tangible goals for this initiative? What's the, by this time next year, we want to engage this many companies in the area?
We're open to borrowing or stealing any great ideas from anywhere. So we're looking at Greenville, South Carolina. Julie's pulling together obviously, our economic development engine for biotech in the state has really brought us to where we are at number 2. So we definitely look to that location. We are focused on the 3 counties in the southeastern region, Brunswick, Pender, New Hanover, with an impact to the greater southeastern region. We will always be focused on this small region, but we will always reach out to other locations and say, let's work together, let's look for opportunities to build resources together, and RTP would be the obvious choice there. Just generally related to biotech, we would see over time, 20, 30 years, the same type of development in this area that we've seen in RTP. When you think about RTP and the fact that that's been there about 50 years, you know, for the first 20 years, for the first 10 years it was forest. For the first 10 years after that it was forest. They started really developing about 30 years ago. All of its long-term economic development, capacity development, that's what we're working on here. One of the ultimate goals eventually is to build a corridor between here and RTP, just like we've seen starting to develop between RTP and the Triad and Charlotte. We want to see the same thing happen here, and we reach out toward Charlotte as well, especially when you're looking at marine biotech, marine fish farming especially, ag biotech, all of the bioproducts capabilities and applications and potential that I talked about, that connects to Charlotte and to RTP. So we definitely want to build those assets throughout the entire region and throughout the state. Short-term goals for this initiative are simply to pull people together, to look at the cluster we have, identify things that can help the cluster grow here and stay here. We, you know, when you really think about it, clinical research is not what people traditionally think of as a biotech effort. But we think it's so important to have these companies here, to help these companies stay and grow here, that we want to work within that realm to help them grow. The health benefits, the question from the back earlier about the benefit to the community, the health benefits as well as the economic development benefits can be immense. The longer term goals are much the same as the short term goals. We want to see companies be able to start here, stay here, grow here. We want to see lots of employment as one of these sectors that the region is able to host. You want to add to that?
I take issue with, I'm going to disagree with you about the amount of money that we could be seeing funneling into the area from participants in clinical trials. Today, there's a greater scrutiny on one, the FDA looking at the amount of money that's paid to patients and to the physicians who are serving as investigators. So that's becoming less of a forefront issue. A lot of times when that does happen, it's for unique cases where there is an extreme burden on the participant in the trial, whether it be sitting in a phase 1 unit, as they're called, for multiple days and having 14 blood draws in 2 hours, or to check metabolism of a drug. So that's not our mission to pigeon, getting additional trials to this area so that people can get paid. It's really more of a general benefit around, what information can be brought to this area and what exposure to, availability to other products can be brought. We're in the midst of supporting a child who's 12 years old that's going to Chapel Hill 3 times a week for glioblastoma, which is a neurological brain and spinal cord tumor. And the drugs that she can get in Chapel Hill, which are investigational, she could be getting here and be at home if there was an investigator in this area doing those types of trials. So that's the kind of things that we would like to see as an initiative, really bring to this area is ability to offer what other areas have to offer.
This is sort of a related question, but for Emmett, sort of about your data. Is the demographic data, you talked about that as a reason we might think there could be more clinical trials here, but is the demographic data recognized as a competitive advantage? You talked about sort of obesity numbers and diabetics. Is that, if someone is going to do business here and they need a are those data, the criteria, you know, you mentioned some that I guess are sort of the standard ones, you know, obesity, diabetes, age. Do those vary? Do we come up with new clinical needs?
That might be a question for
I'm trying to.
One thing I was just thinking about that is I'll let Evan off the hook on this one. He's just recently started with the Biotech Center. We asked him to put together some very rudimentary early information to start answering a few questions. As we move forward, we'll dive down deeper. So any ideas that you have for how best to dive down into that data?
Well, maybe that's a rhetorical question. I mean, we have the demographics here that make trials go down easy because there's a lot of people who are in this, what was the word that starts with an I, the entrance criteria. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's good to do because a lot of people here have diabetes. I just don't know if that's true.
Well, and really what you're getting at is communication. I mean, first of all, we have to identify, I mean, the report that Emmett's been working on, you know, is one of the first that I know that has really been collecting the type of data that can be presented to companies that are looking at the area as far as what is here. We really, and that gets back to, you know, making ourselves known and really communicating what's here. Because certainly, you know, you've got GSK up in the park. If they're looking for a diabetes group and a physician group to do a trial in down here for a diabetic medication, you know, if we've got the numbers and the education in the area to show people to understand what a clinical trial is all about, then certainly you've got a win for not only the community, but you've got a win for the company and for the businesses here. So, you know, it's connecting it all together. But surely, you know, the more that we understand who's here and what's here and what is in the desire, and, you know, as far as clinical trials go, we can certainly bring more work here.
Could be a negative as well. I'm just thinking about if the incidence is so high here, does this population become non-representative in which to do drug trials? That issue.
The one thing you really look at in my experience is you look in the areas where, you know, typically companies will go to the same well over and over again. This area is new ground, virtually. So there's so much more here, and also because we are a transient community, you know, there's a lot of you know, mixture in the demographic issue, especially you know, with the medical backgrounds of people coming into this area. So there's a lot of diversity that we can draw from here in just the patient base, potential patient base.
Well, it's not just the patients, you also need to have investigators that are also trained.
Right.
So when pharma companies come here and like investigators, it costs more money to train more investigators. So over time, you're going to have a better pool of investigators.
And that's another thing, and Heather actually is one of my medical writers, and in this area, you know, one thing that is increasing is the desire to do clinical trials because the basis of the physicians that we're bringing in are coming in from the institutions where they're used to having clinical trials as an alternative to offer their patients access. So when you've got physicians that are coming here that have been trained at Case Western and they've been at the University of Chicago, and they've, you know, not just Duke and UNC, but from many other areas that we're now attracting to this area, they're used to having that as a resource. So that's another piece that's building up in this area, the desire to do it.
We didn't really talk about it a whole lot tonight, but we have over time just anecdotally identified doctors, physicians who want to do clinical trials, but they either don't know how to get into it, they're afraid of the risk, there are all sorts of reasons why they don't move forward with it, or why they move forward with it and they're not successful for a whole range of other reasons. So one of the things we want to do is to reduce the risk for physicians by providing training opportunities, by helping them understand the risks that are involved and ways to mitigate those risks, so that at some point we'll have a base of physicians that we can also go to the world and say, if you company want to do a clinical trial, we have a bunch of people here who can work with you to conduct those trials.
And the risk is not so much patient risk as it is business risk.
Yes.
I'm still trying to get at the economic development opportunity and how we exploit it. Let me put it this way. I know you have a bias, a good bias, which I applaud, towards the Southeastern region and the state as a whole. Our interest would also transcend the state. We'd like to draw these companies from all over the country, if not the world. So put it in that context. This is not competing with anything you have a vested interest in. How do we attract those companies from the rest of the country and the rest of the world?
When we talk about recruiting companies, it is from other states or internationally. I do think most of our successes will come from entrepreneurial ventures that start up here, or folks who live here and want to work with business around here. But that's part of why I mentioned the deal with traditional recruitment companies like Wilmington Business Development, like NC Southeast, like Commerce, North Carolina. When they go out and talk to people around the world, we want them to be able to talk about the clinical research cluster that's so strong here to attract additional clusters or additional companies. There are specific things that we do around this cluster to promote it. We're working with the Bio organization, the International Bio organization. We hosted a panel as part of the North Carolina Pavilion that was specific to the NC Coast Clinical Research Initiative. It was in conjunction with the Modoc research panel that was there. And I don't think I've ever seen a more successful use of a panel at or what could otherwise be thought of as a booth at a conference than what Julie did with Modoc. She beforehand had tons of meetings set up with companies as potential clients to work with. And so what we would work on, and as part of that panel, reach out to companies that don't already have a presence here and say, we have this cluster of companies already. You can have a forward operating base here or a satellite office or relocate your headquarters here, and you've got access to this great workforce. You've got access to assets and resources in the area that don't exist in most places because of this cluster of companies that we're going to have. So there's that message piece of reaching out to companies all over the world to tell them about the cluster we have here. In order to really do that the way we need to, we're going to have to raise some marketing money and do an actual campaign out of the clinical research initiative in addition to what the existing and traditional economic developers already do. But we start with those assets that are already in place to get them to start talking more about the cluster. But there are very targeted things we'll need to do. Some are very cheap, and we already do that all the way from just connecting with a Rolodex of people who are companies elsewhere and tell them to move here, all the way to targeted marketing initiatives to get the word out about the cluster we already have. Does that come closer?
Much closer.
Okay.
What are the weaknesses of the region and how do we solve those issues?
What are the weaknesses?
To growing this.
One, and she'll be better at answering this than I am probably, but one of the weaknesses is just so far the lack of physician community interested in becoming part of it. And again, I think that's from a range of reasons, not necessarily related to their interest in being in conducting clinical trials, but more from all these other issues that crop up in relation to it. We have so many strengths here that it is difficult to identify the weaknesses. We, as Julie mentioned and I mentioned earlier, we have identified some of the weaknesses in workforce training, if there were any, or at least ways to improve on what we have. The companies that are here continue to do well and grow, including a large acquisition you just heard of recently. And clinics just merged with PMG, so things continue to move forward. I haven't heard of any lack of ability to get the workforce companies need, to get the investment that they need. But you're in a company. Do you have a perspective on that?
There's a lot of positives here. There's always going to be negatives. I think clearly probably the negative I see here right now is just the fact that this area is not as aware as they need to be of what is here. Clearly, I think that's, it's easy for people to see GE and Verizon and Time Warner and all the others, but, it's like when the marquee comes off the building off of Eastwood for Quintiles, you think Quintiles has left the area. Actually, it only moved one person back to the triangle. They just went virtual. So that's what I think we have to be concerned about, how closed-mouthed we stay and not be afraid of tooting our own horn for this area.
So doesn't that call for organizing everybody who's in this three-county area into a cohesive organization that would do some advertising and promotion and spread the word?
That's the
I think,
initiative that we're talking
So I get it, but where are we with that?
Well, I think first and foremost, in my opinion, we already have that organization. It's called our city government, and they need to do more of it in this regard, in this domain. Just as they've been able to, we can sell the beach, we can sell clinical research.
Yes,
Randall, Julie, I'd like you to focus specifically on one of the companies you brought up today. It's the Biotechnology, which I know they're doing terrific work down there, and it seems to hit the sweet spot for everything you're talking about. And yet, for some reason, they've not hit critical mass. I know that they have a new structure that's going up there, but they're still going, I wouldn't say hand to mouth, but they are struggling, not as much as before. Why in the Sandhill can't we get something like that that hits on all the strokes you're talking about and make that work in this area? What's the stumbling block?
Money.
Oh, good. Now, you mentioned briefly, Julie, the government. Do you feel that there needs to be more, direct input, city, county, state, federal money into these kinds of things, or what do we need to do to make it happen? We got one sitting right here that can take, in this case, marine biology from discovery all the way through to real drugs. And I know they're on the verge of getting one right now. What more can we ask for? How can we make them successful?
What you're asking is a little bit outside of the clinical research question. It will relate to the clinical research question insofar as part of what Morbionic's doing is related to pharmaceuticals. Would you like me to, did you have an answer to part of that?
Well, there's lots of communities I think we can learn from. Just as Randall mentioned about, us trying to visit one group down in Greenville, South Carolina, that's built up from a very small rural hospital, into a very well-recognized research center. And, it's really coming together with the effort of learning from other areas that are matching us as far as size and what's here, and being able to grow a community program. While the university is doing, as you said, great things there, and they really truly are, it's really remarkable. But they're going to have to go outside the university and look to the community itself to see how it can support and draw in the availability of people putting aside the aspect of being in competition, but it being in collaboration. And I think there's a lot of examples to draw from that we could learn, and that would certainly help escalate what's happening there.
I'll continue with that, specific to Morbiotic, and that really is a different issue. It relates to what I was talking about earlier, but they are on the cusp of commercializing some of their technology, and it's in a range of sectors. There are pharmaceutical opportunities, there are marine fish farming opportunities, there are algae for bioproduct opportunities, there are blood-brain barrier pharmaceutical, you know all about that. Those opportunities do need funding to move into the marketplace, and that's the area where they would benefit dramatically. You got to think long-term, as I'm sure you do, about these opportunities. So, a few years ago, the the Center for Marine Science was brand new. There was no concept of commercialization. Over time, they've developed this focus on commercializing the technology and the ideas that they've developed there. Now, they have a building that's coming out of the ground very rapidly that will foster not only the development of that technology and commercialization into the marketplace, but will foster company development in the building. Companies either to relocate here from somewhere else, to start up from here. It may be talent that starts with one person who says, I really love that idea on the blood-brain barrier pharmaceutical. I'm going to take that, I'm going to find the investment, I'm going to locate it in a more bionic building. Over time, I'm going to hire a couple more people, and they grow organically there until they're too big to fit in the building anymore, and then we find another place for them in New Haven County. That's the idea, but it takes years. It's capacity development. When you look at the development of that center and the marine biotech work over years from the 90s until now, the progress is dramatic, but they're still not there yet. They've still got a ways to go, but they're definitely on the right track. They need more investment from a variety of sources over time. But again, I go back to my RTP analogy. 50 years ago, there were woods. 40 years ago, there were forests. 30 years ago, there were still forests. It takes forever for this vision to come around, but they're definitely moving in the right direction, in my view at least. I think I would say they're on the cusp. They're closer than they've ever been to commercializing several of the technologies that they've been working on a number of years.
To what degree does critical mass become a limitation? And it feels like we have a lot of things that are just getting going. But when I think of one of the challenges that we've had in attracting faculty is that often faculty or potential faculty are married to well-educated individuals that have a hard time finding a job in whatever their specialty is in Wilmington. And so often that candidate won't take the job because they can't find something for their spouse. Is there a critical mass kind of challenge here? Just getting to the point where we can be self-sustaining and growing this kind of kind of industry at that kind of sustainable level? Is that
part of what you're asking relates to the need for a diverse economy. I mean, everything that I'm talking about tonight is knowledge sector based for the most part. The bioproducts and the biofuels has more of an industrial feel, and I haven't called it this, but a lot of people call that industrial biotech because it means big buildings and people in there running machines. A lot of what I'm talking about is knowledge sector. So you need a diverse economy so people can come here and be in knowledge sector jobs at clinical research companies, but they can also have other opportunities for their spouse to work in. And it might be another knowledge sector company in IT or services of some kind. It might be an industrial or otherwise other type of company. So you need a diverse economy. The larger question of trailing spouse is one that we have had a long time, we'll continue to have for some period of time. But the question of critical mass, I think, is important, and we already have it. If you're talking specifically about critical mass of clinical research companies, I think the data show that we do have a critical mass of companies. So a person who wanted to relocate here would have many options for other things to do, other companies to work for if something didn't work out at one company. And that critical mass is something that does pull people in. That ability to do between jobs. The trailing spouse one is a challenge that we'll have for a long time. I got to say, we got to continue to develop a diverse economy and lots of opportunities for those people. Does that answer your question? Anything else?
I'd say one of the other telling charts from the one presentation on the ratios and whatnot was the lack of a teaching hospital, because you could tell in the numbers it was sky high for Durham, Chapel Hill, even Asheville with a teaching school, Greenville. UNC as a system is very picky about where they allocate things, and then UNCW's wanted engineering. Is there any potential of getting medicine You know, there's the nursing school, but that seems like that would start to build that more progressive medical community that would demand clinical trials versus more of a retirement doctor basis, us being a retirement city, unlike all the other cities in the rest of North Carolina, other than a little bit of Asheville, I guess.
I'm glad you brought that up because that answers a weakness question.
Yeah.
That may be a weakness here. What I would prefer to do though is focus on what our strengths are, and the strengths are that we do have a regional medical center here that has the ability to move more to clinical trials. We do have a diverse patient base. We do have a good number of doctors, many of whom anecdotally are interested in moving into clinical trials. So my focus would be on building on what we have, not necessarily trying to compete in a head-to-head basis with Asheville or other communities that have a hospital, a teaching hospital or a medical center like that, but just to look at what we actually have and what we can do to build that.
That's kind of tangential to something I've been thinking about for a while, in that we have such a strong field of holistic practitioners here, and then with the Bio doing so much research that's based on nature and the rise of biomimicry and all of that, like, I mean, it kind of ties in. Like, I keep thinking, because what I keep hearing is, how are we going to be luring people from elsewhere? What is it? And it just, to me, the words that keep coming are competitive advantage, competitive advantage. You know, what is it? What's the competitive advantage? Because so far what I'm hearing is, I'm not hearing any competitive advantage. All I'm hearing is just one more place, although we know we have the beach. But, you know, what is it that's going to cluster people? And I think, you know, you've got undoubtedly the rise of integrated medicine, where, you know, Duke is doing a lot more with integrated medicine. In Athens, they have a whole, you know, field around holistic stuff, and there's going to be more and more of a convergence in these two things. But somehow, like, if there was some sort of competitive advantage around natural, you know, products or something like that, because we, you know, especially with the CFEDC and trying to go towards the sustainable, clean economy and all that, is there, you know, any way to look at that? Because we do have a really unusual, I think, for the size of our area, number of people who are studied in, you know, Asian medicine and things like that as well. Perhaps that could somehow be.
A lot of the competitive advantage for clinical research does lie in the fact that we have a critical mass of clinical research companies.
Okay.
Not many people have the type of cluster, or not many locations have the type of cluster that we have here. So that's something built in itself. I mentioned earlier, if you're looking more broadly at biotech, the fact that we have an international marine biotech center here with a Modoc building coming online, that is a differentiator in itself as well. You mentioned some of the quality of life issues that are differentiators for us that might pull people here versus other locations. I won't mention other locations that are less desirable in case you come from there. But you know, there are lots of things about the Wilmington area, the Southeastern region, that make people want to live here. So the competitive advantages might be on the industry side, the workforce side, the critical mass side. They might be on the quality of life side. Again, I'll go back to the fact that I think recruitment of people and companies to the area is important. It definitely needs to be part of the larger economic development picture. I think for us in this area, this region, entrepreneurship is going to be much stronger long-term, much more beneficial to the area long-term than simple recruitment. I will say, though, that it's easier to recruit a person here because of the quality of life than maybe other locations, and it becomes easier the more critical mass we have of companies where they can work. Real quick, back to the competitive advantage of marine biotech, though. That center is unlike any other. It's foundational, it's just getting started. There are some that are bigger, better funded, etc. But for North Carolina and for really this region, there's nothing else like it. And it is a differentiator, competitive advantage that should be a good recruitment tool. and should be a good entrepreneurial venture fuel creation.
And I think, like what Shar was asking about the GMOs, I mean, I know that's just such a huge rising concern among people that, like, you know, if there's some way to do, like, you know, if you're here, you know you're not doing GMO, but, you know, I'm from Wilmington, Mark's means, you know, like, I'm from Boulder, I'm crunchy, you know, or whatever.
I'm not saying whether GMO is good or not. I'm not going to try to decide that. What I can tell you is basically most of the GMO work that's done is what farmers have done for hundreds of years in the field. They're just doing it in the lab now more quickly and at a more cost-effective basis, so it can actually benefit humans. I mean that and we can talk further about that. We don't want to get too far in that, but it's not much different from what farmers have always done. For here, there are many competitive advantages related to our natural resources that will also help preserve the natural resources. I mentioned those briefly in the presentation before. Ways to use water more effectively so we use less of it. Because, you know, dwindling supplies of water are going to have a huge effect on the population of humans as we continue to grow the population. One of the other areas is with the marine fish farming. Because we are overfishing the oceans, we will have to grow fish inland if we want that fish protein. And so the Carolina Sea Bass and the UNCW work will help ensure the sustainability of food supply for humans and from a fish protein standpoint. In the western part of the state, you're probably aware of the natural products cluster there, companies that use natural resources there, farming, agricultural resources, and grow herbs and other things for human health benefit. We don't necessarily have that strength here. We could, probably, if we really focused on that. Our strengths lie more in general agriculture and potentially the ability to grow energy crops for a whole range of bioplastics, bioproducts, biofuels, of all kinds. So our assets are related somewhat to the infrastructure we've developed, somewhat to natural resources, somewhat to critical mass. And when you start to put that whole package together, I think you can see some advantages of this general area, the Southeastern region of North Carolina, as well as North Carolina, over other locations in the nation and the world.
I'm sorry to monopolize. Let me ask one more question. So when you're talking about clinical research organizations, is that really mainly about pharmaceuticals? Or, I mean, because we're also talking about, I mean, you're also mentioning, you know, for energy usage and stuff like that. But I'm just wondering again, back to biomimicry, like to me, that's where I see the Mar Bio Center being, you know, having this just ace in the hole with what's rising with biomimicry. Every product company is trying to, you know, figure out how to put these principles into their products so they can become more cradle-to-cradle sustainable businesses. And is that part of biotech, or is that not really under that realm?
You know, you can make a broad definition of biotech, and I try to keep it as broad as possible so we can do as much as we can. What you're pointing to there is an important part of the future of biotech, and definitely the Marine Science Center. I think there are other applications on the horizon that will be even bigger than biotech. Nanobiotech, or nanotech in general, is going to be a platform. When you really think about it, biotech is a platform application or a platform on which to build many applications. It's almost like, think of it as electricity. It's going to be in all of our houses, it's in products we use, we need it to function, but there might not be specific applications that we go to every day and think, oh, that's a biotech thing that I'm buying, or that's a biotech application that I'm working on. It will just be part of everyday life. And nanotech will do the same thing, just on a smaller scale. It's a platform technology as well. So within that, there are health products, bio products, all sorts of very tiny products.
I did want to interject. We're just after the 8 o'clock hour, so I did want to let our speakers off the hook at some point tonight. I do thank y'all very much, Randall, Julie, Emmett, Wayne, for coming out and speaking to us on this. To the extent anyone here, if y'all want to hang out and discuss anything, feel free, but we did want to complete your obligation with CFEDC today. Once again, final shameless plug for our September event, New Hanover County Commissioners Candidates Forum. This is going to be your opportunity to come here, hear the candidates' positions on more or less anything you want to ask them. So it's going to be September 25th, 6 p.m. right here in the WHQR Gallery. Hope to see all of you. Tell your friends. There will be press releases. There's already been press releases. There's going to be more press releases, etc. And we hope to have a good crowd where we really challenge whether WHQR is going to fit it or not. So we'll see. All right. Thank you again very much. And to the extent you want to stay around.